Hello and welcome to another episode of the To Baldly Go podcast, and thank you for joining us on our mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to baldly go where so many have gone before. My name is Aaron, and I am on my first trip around the galaxy with the crew of the Starship Enterprise. I'm joined this week by my wife Abbie and our friend Nate as we discuss the next 3 episodes of Star Trek the original series, by any other name, the Omega Glory, and the Ultimate Computer. And with that, let's get started.
All right. Should we actually get something done today?
Should we start talking about some of these episodes?
Yeah. Can't wait.
All right. The first episode, Season 2, Episode 22 already, by any other name. Nice, another Shakespeare reference here.
I love Shakespeare references in the show, that's for sure.
Yeah. My initial thought on this was, okay, so this is Interstellar from the perspective of the other planets.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. Now,
Does
granted,
that make it a good episode in your opinion? I'm just going to cut right to the chase.
I wrote at first, I thought it was a solid 7, but I think I bumped it up even to an 8. I thought it was a great episode.
Okay. Interesting.
I thought there was a lot of good stuff to it. Some questions and how some of the things worked out, but yeah, it was a fun episode. It was interesting. Some interesting things that they discussed in it, and yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed the episode.
Okay.
You?
Interesting. Disliked it.
Really?
I shouldn't say disliked it. I did give it a 5. It really didn't trip any triggers for me. It kind of felt like it rehashed a bunch of the old tropes that we've kind of seen, right? Oh, we're on another, Eden-like planet. Oh boy. Oh, we're gonna go leave the galaxy again, which is supposedly impossible, except for the Enterprise has now done it twice.
I did like how they did call back to that episode.
They did.
And another one, I had to look it up because I didn't remember, but how Kirk was just like, you tricked a guard with a Vulcan mind probe once, right?
Yep.
So I thought that was interesting, seeing them make kind of those callbacks.
And I don't know that we've ever really seen them make like explicit callbacks to previous episodes because
right.
You never knew what people saw or didn't see. They were supposed to be, self-contained in that regard. Yeah. So I don't know. I wrote notes. There weren't even a lot of like quotes or things that I really appreciated. The only one that I don't know was kind of skeevy to me was him talking to the woman whose name I apparently didn't write down because I can't find it anywhere. I don't usually go around beating up beautiful women. Why not? Well, there are better things to do.
Belinda. Her name is Belinda.
Belinda. Okay. And I'm like, that's a weird quote. What? I mean, why not? Yeah. Why wouldn't you? Like, okay. But it just didn't, I don't know, it didn't capture me. It was too many things for me that were just kind of jammed together into one episode.
I had a thought earlier. I am going to reduce my rating by 1 point. I'm going to bring it back down to a solid 7 from the 8. And I'm going to do that because I watched this episode yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And even when I opened my notebook and I looked at my notes, I was kind of like, what happened in this episode? So there wasn't a ton that was overly memorable from it, but while watching it, I thought it was very much what I've come to expect of Star Trek. It was, there were some tropes that have been redone, and I think that's a trend that we are really seeing throughout this particularly later part of season 2, they're kind of running out of ideas. And so they're just recycling old ideas, which we'll see in other episodes that we're going to talk about later today.
Yep.
But at the same time, I thought a lot of the episode worked. It was that different perspective, and then them seeing how are they going to how are they going to outhuman these aliens who are basically stuck in human bodies and not adapting to it very well, which led to some silly aspects, silly events, but I thought overall made for a decent episode.
I even forgot
decent.
I even forgot about the taking over bodies part of this. That is yet another reuse of a trope from a much more recent episode. So
I thought there were some interesting points. I wrote down some questions and then they like immediately answered them, because I was saying, okay, how did these other people get to the Milky Way from the Andromeda galaxy, and how could they use and then wondering how they would plan on using a ship that's capable of interstellar travel for intergalactic travel. And still they sort of addressed it, but not entirely. So they basically said, we'll modify your engines to be able to make the 2.5 million light year trip in 300 years. So then I think, okay, were there any structural upgrades to this ship or anything else that they did to, withstand that kind of velocity? And maybe that doesn't matter, that but yeah, didn't hear anything about that. But yeah, immediately after I wrote that down, they essentially said, we're going to modify your ship to make it work. There were still the issues that they didn't they brought up, but then treated it like, well, we brought this up, so that's sufficient to say we addressed it, with the energy barrier at the edge of the galaxy, because this time they were able to go through it without anybody going all Gary Mitchell on them. So I'm not sure. I don't think they really addressed how that happened. They just asked for a report for damage and casualties, and essentially everything was okay. So there were some weaker points, but I thought the overall feeling I had at the end of the episode was good.
So,
but now I struggle to justify it.
Well, so I want to give Abbie a chance to chime in too, and then I want to talk about something that I think something about the episode that I thought was really interesting, but also could lead to a broader, I don't know, philosophical debate between the three of us. So I'll let Abbie do her thing first, and then I'll bring that up.
I'm right on par with you too, where I agree that this is a very unmemorable episode. Yeah, the normal icks like everyone. So I'm going to give it a solid 5, I guess. It didn't bother me dramatically or anything, but I just wasn't enticed by anything in either. My first note in here is, oh, look, another slavery episode, another Eden. So it's kind of the same thing that Aaron said there. I got a little bit of a hint of like the green tree movement, our planet's dying, that kind of thing. We're killing our mother world, that kind of thing. Again, just some stupid stuff on it where it was like, why is the yeoman even there again? Just to die?
Yep.
Stuff like that where I just don't get it. I don't understand it. And then again, we've got that Kirk yuck factor on it that made it a little bit lower than maybe a 6 I would have given it, where, he's like, Kirk is viewed as this like sex god again, where it's like God's gift to women. You know what I mean? And
Belinda's
obviously,
very intrigued by this.
Obviously, if I kiss you, like, you should like it, kind of thing, where it's like, or she doesn't like you. Not everyone has to like you.
Yeah.
And it was interesting that like the whole point of humanity, he said, was to express warmth and love. And I'm like, not the same thing as kissing there, my friend.
Nope.
That's those are not the same thing.
Now, I will say he had an ulterior motive, right? He was trying to manipulate her in such a way. So I'm not saying that justifies everything, but it certainly explains. He wasn't being skeevy for the sake of being skeevy.
No. But he's just being a man whore for the sake of being a man whore. Like,
for sure.
He was prostituting himself essentially for it.
Yep.
But I'll say this, the only reason that I didn't rank it lower was because I actually did think it hit on some of the kind of philosophical points of what does it mean to be human?
Mm-hmm.
What are our instinctual things? Are we instinctually violent? Which, you know, when they were learning their humanity for the first time, the gentleman was invoked to violence, grabbing the throat. He grabbed her arm and she's like, what are you doing? Kind of thing. Looks down at him. He's kind of shocked by his own reaction. Why'd he grab her when he was angry and jealous?
Right.
Attacking Kirk, all of this, that provoking like that.
Right.
Definitely giving forward the impression from the show that humans don't have control over that unless it's learned. Like the actual human response is aggression that's physical. We are physically violent creatures by nature, and it takes energy and effort to learn not to be so. I found that very interesting. Same thing with like her, where it's the kind of same thing with like the sexual nature of stuff like that. But I found that kind of undertone to what does it mean to be human? What are our core natures and core values versus what's instinctual versus that old nature versus nurture conversation, right?
Yeah.
And then the other piece that kind of was redeeming for me, Scotty, his whole drinking thing. Scotch is what does him in. I mean, that was just prime writing. He's, they're under the table. He's not happy. He's having to bring out the scotch. He shares it, and that stuff it does the trick. The good stuff does the trick. He's so proud of himself. He's about to walk out the door to like tell the captain he got him. Passes out by the door on the way out. I mean, it's just, that was a great comedic element to it.
I enjoyed Scotty's part of this episode for sure. Way to just play into the whole Scottish thing of breaking out the bottle of scotch that looked like it probably came from about 1940 or earlier, but there they are in 2268 or whenever this was supposedly taking place, and he's got it stashed away for a special occasion, but I guess I'm going to use it to drink an alien under the table. I loved it. Like that I will give you was one of the shining lights for me in this whole thing. So
agreed.
So interesting. So this is a thing I didn't think of during the episode, but I kind of thought of it just now, Aaron, while you were talking and while I was kind of looking over some of my notes. And this is a vague recollection that I already had from seeing this episode previously. I didn't remember 99% of the plot, but I did remember their ability to turn human beings into these blocks of minerals and stuff like that. I didn't remember that they could turn them back again, which obviously we see it one time while they're still on the planet, and then obviously once the plot is resolved, the crew comes back because at one point everyone but the four main cast members are these blocks of whatever elements make up the human body minus water. But I think it's an interesting conversation to talk about what makes a human, or what makes a living thing living, that they take all the water away from a body and magically turn it into this geometric whatever it was. I'm gonna call it a cube. It wasn't a cube, but into this cube that's all the elements, but then they can put it back again. Like there's more to life than a collection of elements and water, right? So what's the greater philosophical message of being able to move back and forth, right? You can do it and you can undo it.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's more to life than that, and just being a collection of elements and water, which is just more elements. There's more to life than that, but without those, there's no life. So there's that aspect. But yeah, I think that is a great question facing us now. And as these other episodes address as well, what actually is life? What is consciousness? What is knowledge? And these AI debates that, again, in the later episodes, we're having the exact same conversations today that were being had 50 years ago, about AI and what is knowledge, what is intelligence, what is life,
what is intuition, what is the ability to make decisions on limited, incomplete information. And this, we could probably spend a later episode in this episode talking a lot about that.
A lot more. Yes. Yeah. So I don't know.
It's the
answer.
I mean,
but we know it when we see it.
And to ask the question even a different way is, in that scenario, where's the soul?
Yeah.
Right.
Or when they remove the water and
so
using the Calvin and Hobbes term, transmogrify them into whatever that block is, are they just dormant? I mean,
so
is it maintain whatever knowledge?
Even today, we had that conversation today.
Yeah.
You know, they talk about in classes how we can turn our human body is worth what, $200 in scrap material if you don't sell the actual organs or something like that. There's not a whole lot to us, right?
Right.
So that's, I think, like you said, Nate, the whole crux of what they were trying to say is, you guys are worth nothing. We're this superior creature with a million tentacles. I'm picturing this giant like space octopus thing, you know, or space squid that obviously can't operate the controls of the Enterprise, which I think is the joke Kirk gave in there, right? Like, how is octopus supposed to operate this? But that's what they were trying to do with the episode, right? They were trying to show, what does it mean to be human? We're not just a pile of salt, which we are, but it's how we handle those emotions, how we handle those feelings, what we do with the scenarios that were presented that makes us distinctly human. And they did drive that home in the episode. Like, you're not Kelvin anymore. You won't fit in anymore. What are you going to do when you go home and you don't fit in with them? Which I think is how they resolve this entire conflict in it, right? So I think you kind of struck the nail on the head with the entire purpose of this episode isn't, once again, you know, it's not a slavery episode. It's not them being taken over episode. It's they managed to kind of somehow teach very poorly another race what it means to be human a little bit. We're more than just the atoms that make us, I guess.
It's just such an interesting conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, it didn't hit me until we started to talk about this episode, and I was looking at some of my notes and piecing things back together. I don't know if that was intentional or if I'm just, you know, creating something there that I thought was interesting, but yeah, it was good.
Clearly you're suffering from a flare-up of Rigelian Cassaba fever.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know this one. Would you like some trivia that's interesting?
Yeah.
Julie Cobb, who is the yeoman who died for no reason, because she shouldn't have been there, was married to James Cromwell, who was also in Star Trek.
A few times.
Mm-hmm. So as Zephyr Cochrane, for anyone who did not know that, we'll get to that episode or that movie later. So I thought that was very interesting.
I just always think of him from LA Confidential.
Star Trek is everywhere. Like, everyone has been in Star Trek really at this point. It's between that and Star Wars.
Yeah.
So Tomar is the guy who was drinking, right? With Scotty. Apparently in Spanish, that means to drink.
Sure does.
That was deliberate, I guess. Okay, so here's something interesting, and I pulled this. They call us out. Apparently, this bothered audiences. So we tussle with Kirk. Rohan agrees to allow the Federation to locate a suitable planet for his Kelvins to colonize. And there's never any mention of retribution for the crew member they killed. Like, he just decided to crumble her up in his hands, and they're just like, "Here, have a planet. We're friends with you now."
So, yeah, but how much of that though is them still trying to get away from people who can click a button on a belt buckle and like wipe them out? And they're just like, yeah, we're going to get you to agree to just go to this place, and we're not going to raise shit with you because we want to leave.
Yeah.
They don't try to help them get settled in. They're just like, you can go there. We're getting the hell out of here. Granted, at this point, they're having this conversation outside of the galaxy. So
what do you
And then
do?
there's also, no, again, I'm really curious. I mean, they probably feel like, oh, we mentioned it, so now we can just gloss over it. But how they're going to go out of the galaxy and then back in without somebody turning into this godlike being with the silver eyes trying to kill everybody.
We talked about this. Also, lizards. We're going to go forward to Warp 9 things. Warp Drive then is different than Warp Drive in the Next Generation series. It's not on the same scale. We had to reduce their scale down because they didn't realize they could go as fast as they were going. So in actuality, they're probably going like Warp 5 or 6?
Probably not very
on fast. like the Next Generation scale. Did you know that same yeoman that we were just talking about is the only female red shirt to die? She has that distinction to be the only one.
Oh, I suppose.
There were only 4 female officers to die total, and the other 3 were blue uniforms, so some sort of doctor or some sort. So Elizabeth Denner in the Where No Man Has Gone Before, Arlene Galloway in The Deadly Years, and Dr. Karen Tracy in A Wolf in the Fold. I believe all episodes we've seen. So apparently this became like a running joke though on other shows, which I thought was kind of funny. Like they reference their deaths. I didn't know that, like cooking shows. I guess it was a funny thing that she died like that. I don't know if it's because of like the salt like thing she turned into, and they're just like, add some more of her to this dish or something. I don't know. Apparently it was a joke. I was not there in the 70s to think it was funny, so I can't explain it.
Well, I mean, that tells you what kind of even at the time, what a cultural phenomenon this show was. That's a pretty niche-y reference if it isn't something that everybody's watching, right?
Who was Stuart Moss in this episode? Can someone look that up?
Hanar?
So supposedly, whoever Stuart Moss was asking out Barbara Boucher, who was the alien chick, whatever her name is, Kalinda. So asking out Kalinda, and the actress says, what's the point? What do you have to offer to me? And apparently just completely blew him off, and really hurt his feelings pretty bad. So that apparently now it's in a trivia. Yeah, years later.
He was the same guy that messed everything up by taking his gloves off and touching the scene in The Naked Time.
Yeah, no, he is stupid. Apparently she directly replied, "For what purpose? You're an attractive man, but what can you do for me?" And 6 months later, she married somebody else, or he married somebody else, and she married somebody else too. This was the 10th episode where Sulu was absent.
Oh.
I just had to say it wasn't perfect, but the form on Kirk's rear naked choke of Rohan was pretty decent. Got that hand behind the head, not on top like you often see. Now, he didn't really have the elbow in the right spot, but much better than we frequently see in shows and movies.
Close enough to get the job done?
Aaron's jiu-jitsu moves in there right now.
Is that close enough to get the job done? Because I'm not a jiu-jitsu person at all. So
I mean, it probably wasn't locked in very tight if he could still have a conversation, but still, the hand behind the neck, not on top of the head, noteworthy.
Yeah.
Pay attention to important things.
So in the original script, it was darker than what they filmed. The Kelvins were originally called the Deviants. They executed 10 crew members by opening the shuttle bay doors and letting them be blown out into space.
Oh, that's one way to do it.
Kirk was put through a hellish, quote unquote, torture, and crew members were chosen to mate with each other to breed slaves for the Kelvins. NBC objected to all these, and that led the producer Gene Kuhn to order a rewrite.
So yeah. If there isn't, I know we haven't really established this at all, but when you guys go do the William Shatner Wrath of Khan thing in November, if there's an opportunity to ask questions, Aaron, I think you need to ask about Shatner's formal training in jiu-jitsu, specifically around the episode. Did he have help? Was he taking classes on his own? Like, how did he do that better?
Seeing as this was well before most of jiu-jitsu had even come around in any kind of modern semblance of it, I'm going to guess the answer is none.
So William Shatner invented jiu-jitsu. That's what I just heard.
I think
before you ask any questions, really,
I've read some books by the Gracies. I forgot that's who W. Shatner was in the dedication page.
Exactly. See, this podcast just drops knowledge all over the place. It doesn't have to be accurate knowledge, but it just
to take one of my favorite lines from Saving Private Ryan, to all the listeners out there, just be careful to not step in the bullshit.
And there's a lot of it.
All right. Anything else on this episode, or should we move on?
I think I'm good.
All right. The next episode, season 2, episode 23, I'm going to refer to it as the name that it should have had, because the Omega Glory doesn't really do it. So this episode shall henceforth be known as Team America Galactic Police.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah, this was an interesting episode.
Way.
I thought I liked some of it. I liked kind of what they were going for with a lot of it, but at the same time was like, okay, that might be a bit much, but a lot to
You think the messaging in this episode was a little heavy-handed?
It was a little heavy-handed, going with slightly different imagery than we saw 2 episodes ago.
Do you think it was mildly racist at times? For sure.
Mildly.
Mildly might be putting it mildly.
Yeah. I thought it had, I thought, again, a trend that we've seen, I think, in a lot of these episodes is they start a lot stronger than they finish.
Yeah.
Now it came on very strong at the end, with how it finished, but and even then, I didn't hate how it ended. I thought it was in a way refreshing to see something that was just, here, we're going to have this overt pro-America message, which was then a little odd to have been presented so strongly by a Canadian, but
so, I mean, yes.
Yeah.
Not the only Canadian on that crew either, by the way.
Right. A couple notes I had early on, I thought it had a really strong start to the episode. There was a really good mystery. You're wondering what happened to this crew. They get brought down to the planet, or they go down to the planet, and there's still this mystery of like what is going on here. And they come into basically a public square execution with more of like what is happening, and then they go from there. Yeah, it was I gave it a 7. I thought it was a good episode. I thought it started a lot stronger in terms of quality of episode than it finished. And by the end it was, as we said, very, very heavy-handed.
So I'm gonna ask you. Go ahead. Finish your sentence.
No, at the same time though, I thought the message they were presenting at the end wasn't a bad one. So, at least in my opinion.
So here's my question. You gave this a 7. You also gave the episode previous to it a 7.
Yep.
So you put them on the same level with each other.
I would say the previous episode was higher than this one, but yeah, I mean, we've seen more than 10 episodes, so we have to have some that are the same ranking, even if we would rank them individually, but I don't care to go into fractional points. So I just say I either need to be able to say it's good or great as the differential.
Totally fair.
In my completely subjective rating system.
I mean, there's nothing scientific about this at all, right? So, I agree in that I think it started pretty strong. Like, what's going on? What has happened? There's a mystery. They're trying to investigate it. I think even the whole finding the crew on the Exeter, and they've turned into crystals hanging out of their empty uniforms. Like, I thought that really could have been a very cool like mystery episode to solve. And very quickly they find that last log entry that says get your ass off the ship to the planet, and that's the last we basically hear of the whole thing. And I think it's from that point forward that I really was not in love with this episode. I found the whole thing to be, as I mentioned already, really heavy-handed, really, really overplayed. Definitely, at the time, nobody would have thought that to be racist content, but it's pretty racist by today's standards. When you talk about yellow civilization versus white civilization, like this. But we don't use terminology like that.
With that, though, we need to go back to 1968 when this is being made. And that's where I found it very interesting in trying to think back to that time. I mean, you're 10 years removed from Korea, which wasn't a fight with the Koreans. It was a fight with the Chinese and a fight against communism spreading. And that's essentially what Vietnam was. And they were in the middle of the big ramp up to Vietnam, and then the Cold War is going on. So
if this isn't a complete allegory to the Vietnam War, I mean, I don't know what is. 100% that's the case.
But would those terms be thrown around so easily today?
No chance. So I get it. Like, I understand that was perfectly normal and considered acceptable in 1968. It's very jarring to hear that today, right? It is not terminology that's used. But I think for me, I like it so much more when it's a little more subtle in their messaging, a little more subliminal, if you will. And this was like, you start to wonder if the DoD maybe funded this episode as a pro-capitalist propaganda piece or something like that.
I wrote down at one point, where was it here? I I said it was refreshing to see a Pro America episode, but how is this different than any other propaganda? And then having to wonder, and I mean, we see it today, not to go down too many crazy threads, but I mean, we know that the powers that be are able to are involved with some of the media that's out there and what messages get portrayed. And this is obviously a message that I'm sure some in government would have liked to have seen back in 1968. Something just like, hey, remember, we're the good guys.
And hey, we're gonna take the group of the white people, the ones that look like us in air quote. There's no video when people listen to it. But we're going to call them the Yangs, and that could not possibly have been an accident.
No,
there are a lot.
I mean, they even say that in there because it was the Yangs and the Coombs, or the Yangs and the Combs. So, and it was something I thought like, oh, I didn't. When I first heard those, it just kind of in one ear out the other. I didn't think anything of it. And then when Kirk goes through it and is just like, oh yeah, this is what that means. Because again, just I agree with you. I prefer the subtlety. And I think the only reason I gave this one a 7 was I thought
it wasn't subtle. They pulled out the American flag and marched it across the episode.
Oh, their holy document was the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah, and a holy word for them is freedom.
This one was way too on the nose for me, and I think you guys again hit it on the head where it was like the network was like, listen up, we need you to make this episode. Somehow make it spacey, but we need you to hit these things. Use the word communist, use the word Yanks, Constitution, freedom, had the flag in there somewhere, make it work.
Yep.
Make sure the white man wins. And that's all I got out of the episode. Like, the only positives I had, and I will bring this around to a positive on this one, was we have the new emphasis on the Prime Directive, where it's actually a big deal. Whereas before, we've kind of violated it several times where it's like, well, we don't necessarily agree that we have to do it this time. Now it's like, no, we could get in serious trouble for this. Like, we have to arrest them and all this kind of jazz. The other piece was, Nate, did you catch the very interesting correlation to they redid this episode as a movie? Did you catch it?
Oh.
The entire reason he's on this planet is they do not age.
Oh, yeah.
They're displacing them. Yes. They literally took this whole premise and they didn't play that at all, right?
I don't know why I don't know why I didn't write that down, because I made that connection while I was watching it, and it was kind of one of those thoughts that went into my brain and immediately left, and apparently didn't come back until you said it again.
It was so 100%. Clear to me that this was like, oh my God, this is one of the movies. And we've seen that so many times on so many of these episodes, where this episode itself may not have been fantastic, right? They added a lot of the stuff from the times into it that made it really difficult to age, or didn't season well, or you could tell in this one was just very propaganda heavy. But base concepts are there. If you were just looking at the outline of the episode, so many of these episodes, they take that outline and they revamp it. They've got more funding, they've got more people involved, and then come with phenomenal episodes, ideas, storylines, all based on this original story. Yep. I'm curious if the person who wrote this episode got credit for the story later on, because it's the exact same storyline.
So, I mean, credit for everything. Guess who wrote this episode? Aaron looks like he knows.
I was just gonna say, I was reading a little bit about this. This was one of 3 scripts that Gene Roddenberry submitted to NBC for the second shot at the pilot.
Oof. This does not. So I did not.
I can't imagine that this would have been picked up if this was the first episode that they were seeing.
This also,
or it would have completely changed the trajectory of the series.
This feels very anti-Gene Roddenberry, by the way. Like it's not. It doesn't feel like it fits the ideology that he talks about, right? Or
there's not random naked women. There's not Kirk doing random acts of violence.
Exactly.
Gene does some weird stuff. Where
there's
like
a
Gene
big
was all
long
for
fight
it.
scene with the savages, the Yangs.
No, it's not there. I think he was told to write this episode, or you're not going to get your show continuing. That was my watching this and my takeaway on this. It was definitely all right, you have to do this episode, make it work.
So did I miss it? And the answer to this might be yes, because I kind of had this thought afterwards, but I was too lazy to go back and kind of rewatch and see where I might have missed this. Do they ever talk about how the hell the Constitution and the American flag and all this stuff ends up on this planet? Or is it we're just going to hand wave that away? I gave this episode 5. I'm turning it to a 4 just for that.
I legitimately could not remember. And I'm like, maybe I just zoned out. I don't really are focusing on this one. It was the same episode we watched 45 times again. We've got 2 wars. We've got that same captain who's all of a sudden a good man who's now doing bad things on a planet. And it doesn't sound like him. And they keep saying this on like 4 episodes. That doesn't sound like this person I know really well. And even stupid stuff where it's like Spock's like, wait a minute, say Spock was just like, oh, didn't you know him, Jim? How would you know that, Spock? That he knew him at the academy when he dropped out? Is Kirk just randomly bringing up all these like dropouts from the academy to you and like having these like, okay, that'd be like, hey Nate, we're friends. You know that person Jan who dropped out of my senior class? I remember her. She dropped out of your senior class. I've never met her before, but you mentioned her maybe 10 years ago, maybe if you thought about it, from 30 years ago when you dropped out.
Yep.
So it just didn't track. Their plot was so choppy on this one. Like
I'm gonna. It was a bad episode. Like let's. Yeah.
Did you even get my rating on it?
No, you never gave it unless I missed it.
2. It was just so choppy and had no redeeming aspects for me on it. It was just overall just like annoying to watch. And it felt like it had to be. It's you know what it reminds me of, Aaron, a little bit. It reminds me of Brooklyn Nine-Nine when it came back on, and they had to have like the whole police arc to it because of what was going on in current times. And it was like they had to change the whole premise of the show to be on the nose with what's happening, and like change the characters, change what's going on, change plots, and it just didn't fit within what you're watching. And that's what this was for me. It took me out of the world, essentially, watching it. And second idea, by the way, apparently now Spock likes and just chooses to violate people's minds. I mean, we can't violate the Prime Directive. Like, that's not okay.
Right.
But essentially mind raping people, Spock's okay doing that. He tried doing it to check out the thing in the last episode. And now this one, he literally convinced the girl to bring him the communicator in her mind by like going into her mind and planting that. Like, I'm sorry, violation? Much? What?
Yeah. I know.
I dislike this one.
Not the strongest episode. Like, good message or not, it was so heavy-handed and so implausible even for a fictional science fiction show that no.
Next one.
Yeah, that's all I got.
Or maybe there's trivia on this one.
Here's why I think you both hated this episode so much. Okay. You recognized but didn't realize you recognized Captain Tracy.
He did look familiar, and I did not
look familiar.
Where is he from?
He was Dr. Van Gelder from The Dagger of the Mind.
There you go.
Another episode that I liked that you both hated.
So obviously we just hate him. That's it. Yeah.
Commie bastard.
We'll give that episode
here's our fun trivia on this one. So NBC announced that Star Trek would be renewed for its 3rd season during the closing credits of this episode, and it was broadcast on March 1st of 1968. But in the announcement, they also wrote, "Please do not send any more letters."
They got buried.
Bombarded by the write-in script. This was one of the 3 scripts. Aaron said this for submitted to NBC for the pilot. He wanted to originally write this in the early 1st season, along with the Mudd's Women episode. So that goes against my theory of they were forced to do it. Because if he wanted to write this script way back in season 1,
I don't know.
Not forced to do so.
That could, I mean, he could have just said that.
NBC thought the script was weak and ordered the staff to quote unquote shelve it for an indefinite amount of time until it could be reproduced.
It definitely was weak.
Despite NBC still objecting against it, Roddenberry finally had his way. So again, Roddenberry's episodes are not strong. For having a phenomenal mind on a concept, he is a terrible episode writer. I don't think I've liked any of his actual episodes.
Yeah, he's an idea guy. He is not a execution guy. That's really what it comes down to, right? So as I mute myself because I hit the space bar by accident, let me unmute myself. It is interesting. So here's something that this makes me think of. This is an interesting, parallel. Probably not related, but still kind of a fun story. So there's been a long-standing theory, and there's an entire podcast, short-form podcast series devoted to this, that the song "Wind of Change" by the Scorpions was actually written as a anti-communist propaganda piece by the CIA. And basically the Scorpions were told that you're going to perform this song, and it's going to be you speaking out against communism in Eastern Europe and stuff like that. So this is another one of those where we can invent all the stories we want around he had already written it, it was shelved, nobody liked it, blah blah blah. But hey, there's documented history of the US government using popular media to implant propaganda all over the world. So if you guys or anyone listening is really interested, go listen to the podcast "A Wind of Change" on wherever you can find your podcast. It is one of the most wild stories, because that song is in a lot of ways considered one of the major reasons for the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was not a popular song in the US, but it became the anti-communist, anti-USSR theme song during that period of time. And while the folks that were members of the Scorpions still deny it to this day, there's a decent amount of data that supports that the CIA literally did plant that song. So, I don't know. Super interesting podcast. Go listen to it.
All I see is the CIA coming after you now for spilling the beans.
Hey, if they want to come after me,
the back is going to break out, and we're going to see SWAT team come in through that window and. For those who can't see right now, he made his camera go dead.
Oh, I did it again. I didn't mean to.
That was good, Nate.
Because I can kick the cable underneath my desk and it turns the camera.
That's right. That's your automatic release with your foot.
Right.
That's
awesome.
Hey, if the CIA wants to come after me for talking about a podcast that came out 2 years ago, good luck to them. I have no affiliation.
You know where those podcasters are at this point? No one's heard from them in 2 years.
No, I haven't. I don't know. So I just think it's not implausible to me that this was a planted propaganda episode. Just isn't. So
yeah.
Anything to add, Aaron?
Well, unlike you two, I don't hate messages extolling the virtues of freedom and liberty.
God. Man, how do you mute him?
You can't. I'm the master of this podcast. No, I didn't. It was heavy-handed. It was over the top, but I thought the message was good. I thought the episode started very strong and then took we'll say, given today's climate, we'll say a hard right turn. But I clearly did not hate the episode as much as you guys. But yeah, I don't know. On to what, since I thought this last episode was also a great episode. Well, no, I'll say this was a great. I gave the last episode an 8. I'm sure you two hate it, because it's something that this is another episode, The Ultimate Computer, that we see a rehash of multiple prior episodes. It's not very far into it where we realize, oh, Kirk's gonna suicide a computer again. Because we've seen that now a bunch of times. So we see some things, and we see this theme of this skepticism of technology and machines and them replacing people, and the inherent danger there. So again, it's so interesting that such a forward-looking series still has such a negative view of certain technological advancement. But then I'm watching this, and it's like we are literally having these same discussions today.
It's so timely.
So in a way, this is a timeless episode, even though it's incredibly dated, with the computers that they have and everything compared to what we have today. But yeah, I thought this was a great episode. I gave it an 8.
I also gave it an 8. I thought it was great. That was maybe the redeeming, part of my weekend, going through and watching these episodes, because I'm not sure I could have done a third shitty episode in a row.
Thank you. Oh, it was rough.
My God. But again, we talked about this last week too, right? Instead of being like bang, bang, bust on a lot of these episodes, it's bust, bust, bang, despite Aaron's, terrible opinions on things.
That's fine.
So
whatever. It's just the point of this is him, which makes this even more ironic.
Right. But
it's just so wrong about these.
Man, and it is funny because as much as there are some rehashed plot points and things that have happened several times before, as Kirk logic bombs yet another computer and all that stuff, they still managed to make it interesting. And
the computer presented a different threat.
Yeah, relevant
than other times. I mean, it was still an existential threat to them, but it posed a different threat than I don't even remember what the other computers were doing at the time, but I mean, this one controlling it and basically throwing it into a battle with 4 other starships was obviously a bad situation.
So I had some different love of this episode because I saw so much pull through to other series. We have Daystrom Institute, the Daystrom Institute that handles all cybernetics and positronic brains. We have the computers are written by him. We have that same concept of, can we trust artificial intelligence? We've been struggling with this concept in the Star Trek verse for 40 years. This has been a recurring theme on this. But I didn't realize, I'd never seen this episode before. I had no idea this is actually a person we met the original Daystrom. And then he wrote a supercomputer. I had zero idea about that. So I thought that was really cool to see the origins of the Daystrom Institute.
He was the father of what their equivalent of modern electronics was, with duotronics, multitronics, and like revolutionized computing in that era, right? a true genius up until this point.
Right. And he's trying to prove himself because he became old and outdated, I think was the thing. The young ones made fun of him for being old news and just pride.
20s, and so he peaked and was chasing that high, right?
Right. And so then we have that to start with. And then the other big thing, and this just made me laugh as I'm watching it, is I'm a fully versed nerd, as you are, Nathan. Aaron is not as nerdy as us in this regard. I could not. He's talking about wanting to link up all these starships using this thing. Every single time I hear this, and this was just in the most recent Picard thing too, right? Where it's like, we never learn. I'm sorry. Adama said it right. You don't link up these ships or the Cylons are going to kill you. And we just don't learn. The Cylons are going to take over this computer and we continue to link up our starships. So inevitably, when Musk gets a million different starships out there and he decides to link them up to one brain, I'll be like, there's a reason why I say please and thank you to the toaster. I don't want it to kill me when it takes over everything.
Yep.
Just saying. And Aaron does say please and thank you, by the way, to the Google and the Alexas. Every single
please,
time the kids make fun of him. Yes, every time.
Oh,
thank you.
Ellie tells me I need to be more polite to all the electronic.
They're gonna kill us one day. And this is
I mean,
yeah,
she's already smarter than I am. So yes, I mean, I can't argue that point. I do think it's funny because it is like one of those reoccurring themes, and it becomes a major complaint in fandom of like, why are we repeating the same mistakes over and over again? Well, guess what? Because in real life, you know what we do? We repeat the same mistakes over and over again because we think we know better.
And to be fair, in real life, we tell the exact same stories over and over again.
Also true.
I mean, there's it kind of a recurring theme throughout a lot of this is that we've talked about the hero's journey, and there's a reason that is a common trope and different things that so many stories have those common elements. It's because part of how we use stories is to convey a message and to teach a lesson, things like that. And part of how those get through is repetition. So it'll be a lot similar with enough different elements to keep it interesting. But so I guess to me, it's not surprising that we see things like this that have similar story elements. And maybe I don't know how the other series go. Maybe it goes to kind of a lack of creativity or running out of ideas at this point, or in the case of this one, it's like, no, this is a big theme that they keep exploring with the inherent danger of giving too much power to these computers. We have that's a common theme of discussion that's not necessarily answered in a single 50-minute episode. So they can continue revisiting it with enough different details that while sure, when we've watched all of this in the last few months, we'll look at it and just be like, oh yeah, we've seen this 5-6 times. Maybe that's not the same thought people are having when they're watching it once a week over the course of a few years. So yeah.
So it's interesting too. And I'm sure you both caught this, but again, being a super nerd, M5 is very reminiscent of one HAL 9000 from, Abbie looks confused. 2001: A Space Odyssey.
No? I watched that.
Oh man,
never seen it.
Really? Neither one of you is. All right. So you two,
I've heard the music.
Absolutely need to go watch that movie before we get to the first Star Trek movie. I'm just gonna throw that out there. It is really, really, really important.
It's not, because that's based on something else entirely.
Trust me. People who have seen both movies and listening to this podcast now already understand what I'm saying. So
I think we should watch First Contact first and then go back to it.
Oh, stop.
That's my fan theory.
God, I didn't realize it. So did not realize.
You didn't realize that? You've never thought about that?
No, I'm talking about.
You'd never heard that? Oh.
I honestly didn't hear a word you just said. So.
Oh. Watching First Contact first?
Yeah, no, we can't do that. That would.
For obvious reasons?
There's no obvious reasons to watch that first.
You haven't heard that fan theory?
No, I don't think I have.
We'll get there.
Okay. You'll text that to me later. Let's not mess up Aaron's world. So 2001: A Space Odyssey is for Aaron and Abbie and the probably one other listener to this podcast. So this is was a novel by Arthur C. Clarke and a movie by the same name. I did not realize they came out the same year. Which I thought that the movie was a direct, like, hey, we're going to take this really cool book and turn it into a movie. They were released concurrently, which I just learned. But basically, it's about a artificial intelligence on a spacecraft that more or less gains sentience and thinks that it knows better than the crew on how to operate the ship. Now, the trivia for this episode, because I'm skipping ahead, is that the book and the movie came out just a couple of months after this episode aired. So I thought maybe there was influence one way or the other potentially, but timing wise, it looks like they were developed independently and had very, very similar plot points, which I think is really, really interesting.
It's funny how we see that though throughout time, and especially when there's something that is a big maybe concern, especially in the sci-fi realm. I mean, we see concurrent movies that are developed that are essentially the more or less the exact same or enough similar elements that you could have them be interchangeable. We've got Deep Impact and Armageddon. And then I think those came out the same summer. We've got I had another one, Volcano and Dante's Peak.
Yep.
Came out at the same time. White House Down and Olympus Has Fallen, both ripoffs of the great Vince Flynn book, Transfer of Power. But those both came out completely separately, but within weeks of each other. So, I mean, that's not unheard of, especially if something has some kind of cultural, like, interest at that time. I think we see that fairly frequently.
Oh, there's some really good trivia on this one. Okay, but let's go back to actual episode stuff here. So what did you guys think of the comment about the starship runs on loyalty? So we have a big premise on this one to start with. I feel it shifted midway through to a different idea or different theme. But to start with, we had some major ego hits from Captain Kirk.
Mm-hmm.
What is my purpose? Do I have a purpose? Am I just a glorified, chair warmer and all this? And he even stormed off at one point because of that off-color comment about being an extra. He had a very emotional reaction, had to go downstairs with a temper tantrum and like play around with stuff. And he admits it to Bones, right? And does his therapy with the alcohol or whatnot. But
the best,
it's one of your better prescriptions.
Yeah.
Simple, that was a great line.
But
I'll say this.
And that comes right after, and I did a little bit of research on this afterwards to see the broader like cultural context. It's right after the Commodore calls him Captain Dunsel. Mm-hmm. And like the ultimate like kick in the balls after everything that had happened to that point. And then, number one, a superior officer, but also someone that you know very well, basically says, oh, by the way, you are officially useless. In the most insulting way possible.
Not necessary by any means.
Yeah. And so I know Spock gives context on the whole Dunsel thing, but I looked it up, and the term Dunsel goes all the way back to like the seafaring days, and it literally means what Spock said. It's a useless part of the ship.
Right. So I thought that was very interesting. And I liked seeing the humanization of Captain Kirk. I think that we talked about last episode how it was so on the news what was going on. You know, they were just too banging us over the head of what's happening. This is a direct response to what was going on with the industrial age. We got, you know, jobs being lost because of computers and things like that. We still struggle with that today, right?
Yeah.
Even McDonald's has computers now versus people, all that kind of thing. So, but it was less of a, they didn't whip out the factory name necessarily when they did the episode. It just didn't feel quite as on the head. It felt like an actual philosophical discussion of what is your importance? Can a machine do it better than a human? And I did find it interesting. The person who actually consoled Kirk the most was Spock, the logical one who loves computers, loves the logic base of all this. And he said a starship runs on loyalty.
Yeah, that was such a great line.
That's a really interesting concept because it's not just who's in command. Command does not elicit loyalty. Command elicits respect based on the position and rank, but the well-run starship that he has is because of the loyalties of those officers and that relationship that he has there. So I thought that was so wonderfully phrased.
In the beginning of that part of dialogue too, I think is really interesting because he starts it with, they're talking about the computer, and he says practical perhaps, but not desirable. And there's a little bit of additional verbiage there before he gets into a ship also runs on loyalty. And then it's loyalty to a ship's captain, and he kind of continues from there too. But I thought that was really cool. He also says earlier on, they're talking about it, and Spock says, "Only a fool would stand in the way of progress if that thing is progress." This kind of acknowledgement of, okay, this sounds interesting, but it's unproven. Like, we don't know that this is better than what we have. So if it is, then why would we stand in its way? But if it's not, we need to call it out as such. And so I think Spock, despite being, as McCoy often says, a walking computer, I think he's pretty skeptical about it from the start.
Really? I did not get that. He was very excited about it. He's like, Captain, a machine does not make a judgment call. It bases on facts.
Yep.
So and that's, I think, what helped Kirk be so unhappy.
He's a scientific mind, though, right? So he can be skeptical and still let it play out and keep an open mind at the same time.
Potentially. I don't think that came across to Kirk, though. I think in this one, all he heard from Spock was interesting. It's really interesting how it can do this. It's fascinating that it can do this. It's the same thing as you. That's good.
Yeah.
Which from an emotional being, it wasn't meant to be insulting or derogatory by any means. It was just a statement of fact, like, this is fascinating. This computer's interesting. So, when that's coming from your person who one of the two people you trust more than anyone else in the world, that helped with, Kirk's mental breakdown. I don't know if this episode would have been better if this thing actually had been successful. I think Kirk would have had an actual mental breakdown.
Probably.
If this machine had actually worked and hadn't gone AWOL and killed a bunch of people, and Kirk didn't have a chance to save the day, would Kirk still be a captain? Like, even if they didn't install it in the ship and it went on, he would have a legitimate mental crisis and would not have been the same captain as he was before this machine came on. It would have fundamentally changed who he was as a captain and his purpose.
So can I rewind earlier in the episode to one of the things that, number one, made me laugh really hard, and number two, I think was, I don't know if it's the inspiration for later on, but it's certainly a call forward to later series of Star Trek, where they're in the turbo lift, and Spock looks at McCoy and says, "The most unfortunate lack in computer programming is that there is nothing immediately available to replace a starship surgeon." That was so funny. And also, Abbie, do you feel like that's maybe a reference to something that comes later?
That's one of the trivia things. Less than 100 years later, they have it.
Yep, that exists.
And that goes through a whole phase there too, right? If we're we're going to talk about that, there goes through a whole phase where EMH is a great thing. It's there to help. It's this update technology. We're going to use it. And then all of a sudden, no one uses it. It's removed. It's not a good thing. You can't do it. So that up and down trajectory of using artificial intelligence, artificial birth, all of that has always been this arc of up, it's great, plummets, it's terrible, up, it's great. And we even to this day have not set with a this is good or this is bad. It's just always been there are times there can be good and there's times where it can be very, very risky. And I think Star Trek's been very, very consistent on that in every single series.
Yep.
I think where the risk is when it gets beyond our comprehension and its ability to explain to us in a way that we can comprehend. And that's where the fear is. The fear is that this could become so efficient, so powerful that we won't understand what it's doing and not know how to turn it off. And that's kind of the this was the in discussion of AI and the problems that could be caused. There are those like mental exercises that you could go through to say, okay, if it's as simple as, because a computer can only do what it's programmed to do, it can't do anything else, but how it can interpret those commands, those whatever, could take it down wild paths if left unchecked. And that's the concern, which is exactly what we saw here. This thing had its primary program was to preserve itself. And it did that. And it did that by then saying, okay, well, I'm not going to let anybody touch me. And then gained power from elsewhere and all of that. So it's that unchecked and unknown that I think is what causes the fear. But then I think, like, I got the feeling throughout it that Spock was, like you said, he was a bit skeptical of it, or he was at the very least critical of it. And he wasn't sitting there, I don't think, impressed by this fully developed AI that was essentially its own sentient being at this point. He even said that the machine itself was not behaving logically. And then one of my favorite lines was when Bones then said, "Do me a favor and don't say it's fascinating." He said, "No, but it is interesting."
That made me laugh.
I thought that was great. But at the very end of the episode, I think he really Spock summarizes kind of his entire position that I think was kind of coming throughout it. Because they're discussing what, like, where the machine was lacking, where humanity was better. And Bones was saying it was compassion, the one thing no machine ever had. Maybe it's the one thing that keeps men ahead of them. Care to debate that, Spock? And Spock says, "No, Doctor, I simply maintain that computers are more efficient than human beings, not better." And there really can't be much argument with that. And when you look at AI development as it stands today, it is automating simple tasks that people could do. The computer can just do it a hell of a lot faster. And that's where a lot of stuff is right now. I mean, you even look at generative AI stuff, and being very novice on that, but still generative AI is just scrubbing the internet. So it's reading the internet faster than we can read it to predict then here's what word should come next, and then developing that over time. So it's more efficient, but that also doesn't necessarily mean that it's better at what it's doing than people would be. And I mean, we've had these debates with other friends where we've got some who are in the AI is catastrophic, going to bring about the end of humanity in the next 5 years. And then where I'm currently more of the mindset that no, it's just a tool that will free people up to do other stuff, just like any other technological advancement has. And I think in the stuff I've read and the stuff in the thinking I have done on AI, we're so far from any kind of general artificial intelligence that we don't even know what it would look like, because I don't think we can even define what intelligence is. We don't know what knowledge or consciousness, like we know it when we see it, but we can't even set the parameters for what would constitute intelligence, where yes, we can say a computer can do these calculations way faster than we can, but it can't do anything else. It's like you look at Deep Blue or AlphaGo, and these are incredibly quote unquote smart machines, but all they can do is play chess and play Go. That's it.
So it's interesting you bring that up, because I had to look this up as you were talking, because I couldn't remember what they were. There are different, in this article it talks about waves, and I think that's even the wrong is this the one? Maybe there are different, we'll call it generations of artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right in that the kind of the current AI, even the generative stuff, is based on what's fed into it, right? It's based much like us in a lot of ways. What knowledge do we already have, right? What sets the human apart from the current AI is, or the predominant AI at this point, is the fact that we can make broader leaps of knowledge based on a lot less information and do so accurately, whereas the chat GPTs and all that of the world can't yet.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing is we're kind of on that cusp, and it is going to come much sooner than I think we think it is, where there is much more intuition in how AI behaves, that it can make greater intuitive leaps with far less information and more inaccurate information. And there are models out there that are not commercially available yet, but exist, that are already starting to do this. So it's only a matter of time. And while it isn't the same as the human brain, it's a hell of a lot closer than what Chat GPT can do today.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked at this episode and went, man, if this isn't that allegory for where we are today.
Oh, absolutely.
And what does that mean? And we see the similar things already with like self-driving cars, and them having to make split-second decisions. But what's the decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got 5 people over here and 1 person over here, and you have no choice but to hit one side or the other, right? There's no other option. What decision are you going to make? Not an ideal situation for anyone to have to make. What's the computer going to choose? And it's not necessarily going to quantify 5 lives versus 1 life. And then you get into, well, what if that's
child?
Yeah,
the child aspect of it too. That's the problem with the
that's where I was going.
self-driving cars.
5 adults and 1 child. Like, so it's much more nuanced, but that is where AI is going. And I'm not a doomsdayer when it comes to artificial intelligence. Like, I think the risk is there, but the risk is different than what most people think. Like, I agree. Skynet, like it's a different kind of risk. But 5 years from now, it's September of 2023. So September of 2028, we're going to have a significantly different conversation around AI, where it's going to be much better at doing these things, because that's what they're building right now.
100%.
You say you say that we're going to have a different conversation, but I'm sure that the conversation will be the exact same. The goalposts will have shifted, but the conversation will still be just like it was almost 60 years ago. Is this going to bring about the end of humanity?
Okay.
And that's essentially what the conversation has been. And then there's some technological progress, and then we just accept it into our lives and we take the benefits of it. And then we still say, well, that next step, that's going to be the one that kills us all.
So I phrased that poorly. Because you're right. Yes, we're always going to have the same conversation. We've been having it since the beginning of time.
Yeah. With any technological development. And I mean, we've even had the conversation multiple times in this podcast where it's been we've just had that continuing discussion of the benefits, the pros and cons of technological advancement.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's about, trying to figure out the best way to consume technological advancement in a way that it betters humanity, not worsens it.
Yeah.
And that is a very, very delicate line to walk. Mm-hmm. I have lots of really random conversations in the back of Ubers, again, nature of my job. And so I actually had this conversation with someone the other day who is, trying to break into the technology industry. And I didn't realize, by the way, that Uber's new thing is they pay tuition now for their drivers to go to school, which is kind of interesting. And so he was trying to get into it, and he's like, do I go study like AI, or like what does that look like? Or is AI just going to take all of our jobs? So I was like, I don't think it's a matter of studying AI. I think it's a matter of understanding AI and how it works and how you can apply it to whatever your chosen area of focus is, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's something else in technology, like whatever that is. Like there's a window of time that we're walking into right now where candidates for jobs can really set themselves apart by their ability to leverage technologies like this, be more efficient and effective. And much like we now, we used to call out more explicitly, like, you must have proficiency with Microsoft Word and all these other things. Now it's just expected, right? It's expected that you can open up Word type of document, that you can have basic proficiency in Excel, those kind of things. That's AI in 5 to 10 years, whatever that looks like. It's going to be, how can you
leverage it?
Yeah. How can you leverage it? I mean, hell, I've used it for this podcast, not only to summarize episodes, but that spreadsheet that I track all of our ratings on, I couldn't find a really good table of episodes that I could just like copy and paste into Excel, and I didn't want to type it out by hand. So I went up on ChatGPT and I told it, hey, give me a list of all the Star Trek episodes for it. I don't pay for it, so I get a limited number of lines. So I said all of season 2 with these columns in this order. And it was like a 2-sentence prompt, and it spit out the whole thing. And I copied and pasted that into Excel. It took me no time.
Yeah. And I think you made a good point there, where it will come down to who can leverage the new technology the best. And I keep going back to a conversation I was having with a friend recently who I would say he was full doomsdayer on it. Like, we are years away from a complete human crisis because of AI, and eliminating jobs and people being left behind to die. It was essentially the stance, at least how I perceived his stance. So I may not be giving him quite enough credit.
Sounds like you need to show up on the next episode, or we need a bonus episode on AI and the perceived threat.
And for me, I'm coming off of a couple weeks ago, I was at Dreamforce 2023 whenever this gets released. And that was billed as the biggest
and they're gonna
AI
realize how far behind we are.
That was billed as the biggest AI event in history. And it was. I mean, their huge focus is on generative AI and various AI aspects and prompts.
Why wouldn't it be?
But all of it is, it wasn't, here's how you're going to lose your job. It was, here's something that you're already doing step by step on your own. And we're going to give you the technology to allow you to do that faster so you can go do other stuff. Yep. And maybe I'm callous, but I feel like so much of it will end up coming down to the people who embrace some of the new technology and things like that will probably have the best luck, as it were, going forward. I mean, I could be dead wrong.
No,
and the Cylons could take over tomorrow. I have no idea, but I started looking in an old role and started thinking, like, I'm going to learn how to write some of these algorithms and do some of this stuff and start leveraging the technology that's available now. So I'm not behind the game when stuff does start replacing these jobs that can be done by a well enough programmed computer. And most of our jobs really could be. It's just a lot of those computers are not, like, it's not there yet. So I don't feel like it's anything imminent. I mean, a while back, it took a long time for me to get through it, but I read the book Gödel, Escher, Bach, An Eternal Golden Braid, and that book is a complete mind fuck. I highly recommend it. It's wild. But it's about knowledge and AI and intelligence and all of these different things, and how they tie together and how we can't even define them. Like, you can't define a perfect system because without being self-referential or recursive and things like that. So there are these limitations that we can somehow accept them and get past them in our minds, but in a computer it would turn into an infinite loop and then nothing would happen. So this book was written, I believe, back in the 60s, and it was a fascinating read in the 2020s. And I want to revisit it, but it's one of those that just shows how little we truly understand so much of that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's terrifying when you don't understand something.
Yeah, the unknown is scary. We're pre-programmed to fear the unknown. Like, that is a survival instinct. It takes a different level.
It's there for a reason.
Yeah, it takes a different level of awareness to be able to push past that and understand why, and then figure out how to make something work in your favor, right?
Yeah. We have technologically evolved so much more than we have biologically evolved in the last 200 years.
And that's probably going to be true for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
So I would like to, just so it's on the recording, I, for one, welcome our robot overlords. I just want to make that clear. I don't think Aaron does, but I don't tie myself to that. So if the Cylons they are taking over, that's the wrong show, but I don't care.
I know I have been made fun of by my kids and by Abbie on this podcast more than one time for the fact that I say thank you when Alexa turns on the lights or Google plays a song that I ask for.
Well, I can tell you that she heard you, and she didn't turn off the lights, so that's a good sign. We're 9 minutes away from that, but you did light up an acknowledgement to you acknowledging her presence.
Thank you. Yeah.
Anything else you want to cover on this one? I really like this episode. Like, this
I thought this episode is great. I thought it hit a lot of good points. I thought it was the first thing I wrote, the same discussions occurring today. and yeah, just sit back and let the machine do the work. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting to think about in this how, like, the machine caused the deaths of a bunch of crew members, and then it's kind of like mentioned and then just gone.
Yep.
But again, kind of the thought being, okay, if this was the status quo and not just one starship that way, it's like, okay, it's going to be machines fighting machines. It's not going to be machines fighting people necessarily, given this example and how that could have gone. I'm
going to derail this whole conversation because I know we're wrapping up, but I just thought of it. This is where Asimov's 3 laws of robotics.
Okay, nope, but waiting for you guys to stop talking. I have it pulled up.
Oh,
been waiting patiently. I have been putting my ability to not talk, interact. I've been trying so hard not to interrupt because you guys were talking on theme, and I was like, I even looked up when were they written, because I'm like, okay, Asimov's. I literally have it pulled up. 3 laws of robotics, shortened to Asimov's laws. They were written in 1942. I did not know that they were that much earlier than this episode, because I was like, wait a second. So for those who do not know, it was made more popular by the iRobot movie that was made in the 2000s, question mark. But the 3 rules of robotics are: the first law, a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. Second law, a robot must obey the orders given to a human being, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And then the third law, a robot must protect its own existence, as long as such protection does not conflict with the first and second law. So that is what I immediately thought when I'm watching this. Artificial intelligence, these laws were not in place. I was like, man, they must have written after this episode that they didn't even have that thought about, or that kind of concept. No, this was written way before that, which was really interesting to me. But if you've read iRobot or his actual book Roundabout as part of it, doesn't work. As they evolve, they find a way around those laws anyways. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the whole concept. I think iRobot's the first one. I think the Sunshine is the second one. I think I read them way back in the day. But I did find that very interesting. But yay, good brain. Good minds come alive there. Nate?
I am a true nerd, because I probably quoted all 3 of those without looking them up.
I could have too. I just didn't know the date they were published.
Yeah.
Now, with those, it's not like those are physical laws.
No,
so I mean,
they might be programmed into the machine.
Yeah. Well, they should be, but if they're not,
then anything can happen, right?
Right.
Then you
that's a big assumption that code is just inherent in anything that's written.
Stop raining on the parade.
I was gonna say, I mean, the robot essentially made it shoot a starship, and then it didn't. You could maybe argue that it indirectly caused the deaths, but when the one guy was kneeling down trying to get into some control thing, and then it just vaporized him. That was kind of direct.
It's just in the way. No big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what I got. I mean, really, really good episode.
Yeah. Abbie, did you give a rating for this one?
She might not have. If she did, I didn't write it down.
Probably a 4.
I enjoyed it. It's one of the better ones, honestly, for me. I'll give it a
6.
7.5.
Huh.
What?
Just a half point more than us.
Did you guys give 7s? I didn't pay attention.
8. Another line in there was when Kirk said, "I knew Bob Wesley. I gambled on his humanity." So again, just that juxtaposition of humanity versus the machine.
It's a bold move, Cotton. Let's see how it plays out.
Right.
The alternate could be, this is a trap. It's trying to lure us in. Let's just blow it all.
Well, and they said because that's exactly what a trap would look like.
Yep.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I thought it was a great episode. So good to know that they still have some gems in here, even in the later episodes.
I'm gonna be really curious to see because now we have 2 episodes left in season 2. I want to know how this plays out. Does this season end on a high note, or does it kind of peter out? And then we lead into season 3, which I don't have a lot of recollection of many of these episodes, so it could be interesting.
Yeah. 2 episodes left in season 2. I think we'll want to maybe after season 2 jump ahead for a week and do the motion picture. Just for timing of us going to Wrath of Khan in November. I do want to see the first movie before that, even if I'm not through season 3 and the animated series at that point.
Totally fine. I don't think here. And then you're gonna watch Wrath of Khan there. You're not gonna watch it and then watch it again.
Right. That's my plan at this point. So then after that, then we'll discuss Wrath of Khan, and then pick up on wherever we are in season 3, and then in a couple months here get to supposedly the good stuff. Granted, we'll have like 4 or 5 straight weeks of, or 3 or 4 straight weeks of movies, which that'll be fun too, because I've heard the movies are great.
I'm looking to see. I really do want you guys to watch 2001: A Space Odyssey. Can you stream it on?
We can. I looked it up earlier. I think it's on HBO or on Max.
It looks like it's on HBO or Max. Yeah, you're right, Max. Whatever you want to call it this week.
Yeah.
Just for context.
Yeah.
The plots are not similar, but there's a reason why you should watch that and then watch the motion picture. And I'm not going to spoil it. It is a really, really, really good movie. Like, I'm not going to send you down the rabbit hole of watching a 2.5-hour movie just for funsies. Like, it's Stanley Kubrick. You can't really go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So the plot's really good, but there's an interesting way that it ties into the motion picture that's, I think, relevant. So
nice.
When you get some time, watch it.
Yeah. Well, there you go. I feel like we've had this conversation before. You've heard this episode before. But that's okay. In life, how often do we tell the same old stories to the same old friends? Repetition is how we remember things. It's how we figure things out. It's how we learn about the world and about those around us. There are timeless truths which we uncover through the use of story. We tell the same story with slightly different details, a few different inflection points, we change the emphasis. I know in this podcast, I've repeated the same stories. I talk about the same books. Maybe that's just part of human communication. There isn't always something new and interesting, but that doesn't mean there isn't something interesting. We connect dots to understand things, and not every dot is necessarily an outlier. Sometimes dots connect to many things, maybe in different ways. It's an interesting exploration at the very least. I am curious, though, is this how people viewed the show when it originally aired? If I were to watch only 1 hour of Star Trek each week and have weeks or months between some of these similar episodes, would it seem so repetitive? Or is it largely because we're watching 3 episodes a week, watching an entire season in a couple of months, that we feel like they are repeating storylines? I don't know the answer, and even if I did, I don't know if it's necessarily a flaw in the series. Perhaps the show is simply reiterating the importance of the topics being discussed. As we've said many times, look no further than the discussion surrounding AI. Nearly the same conversations are occurring today as they were exploring back in the 60s. And it's an important conversation to have. Now, I could reiterate the same points over and over again, so I'll just leave it here. Maybe repeat stories are a feature, not a flaw. Then again, maybe it's a sign of running out of new ideas. Or maybe both are true. Who knows? I said I was going to leave it here, so I guess I probably should. Besides, there's a non-zero chance I'll have similar things to say next time. As always, thank you for joining us on this journey and sharing your time with us. If you're watching along, next week we will be discussing the final 2 episodes of the original series Season 2, Bread and Circuses and Assignment Earth. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and leave us a rating and a review. We appreciate it. One last note. We recorded this in late 2023. It's now early 2025. I still have not gotten around to watching 2001: A Space Odyssey. Sorry, Nate. I should probably do that sometime. For Abbie and Nate, this is Aaron, reminding you to never give up, never surrender.
Oh, that's pretty good.